Okay, so welcome everybody. So we're going to have a quick look at the pelvic floor today. So I'm just going to move this back a little bit. So apologies if you're watching this at home, you're going to get a headache now while I do that. Okay, that's better. So the pelvic floor. So there are two times in a woman's life where her pelvic floor fails her. One is pregnancy and postnatal, and the other one is menopause. So you have to go through all this again in about 30 years or 20 years' time. So I've just put this little handout together. And the first thing I've done is put a quote on here, which says, pregnancy and childbirth can have a lasting effect on your pelvic floor fitness. So there's a little diagram here showing you actually what the pelvic floor is. So although we have this understanding of the pelvic floor as a thing, you might not actually understand what it is and what it consists of. So it's a hammock-like series of muscles, ligaments and fibrous tissues connected to the base of the spine and the pelvic bones. And there are actually several layers of this muscle forming the pelvic diaphragm and also housing rings of sphincter openings around the neck of the bladder, the vagina and the bowel. And the thing is with these muscles is some of them go that way from hip to hip and some of them go from front to back. So there's a lot happening. It's like a trampoline that is reinforced with the muscles going in opposing directions. So some hip to hip, some pubic bone to tailbone. And it's the pubic bone to tailbone one that we can affect by our movements. Just because we've got a lot more articulation, we can change the angle between the pubic bone and the tailbone. And that is actually important when we come to look at giving birth. So we want the biggest space between the tailbone and the pubic bone. So understanding how that works is really useful. So I might actually do a session on stage 2 labour tomorrow, because we haven't done that. We've done stage 1, haven't we? We haven't done stage 2, so not tomorrow, next week. So what does it do? So the pelvic floor forms a strong support at the base of the pelvis, and it holds the organs of the lower abdomen in place, so the bowel, the bladder and the uterus. The sphincter muscles are normally in a state of contraction. So that's what sphincter muscles do. We have to relax sphincter muscles to do the job that they need to do, which is to kind of generally open an opening. So whether it's on your bowel or whether it's on your bladder, they're normally in a state of contraction. Otherwise, we'd just be permanently weeing and pooping because we have no control over our sphincter muscles. And interestingly, this is what our babies have to develop. You know, once our babies are born, it can take between 2 and 5 years for them to gain conscious control over their sphincter muscles. But they are permanently closed. And you've got another sphincter muscle on the neck of your stomach actually, and that's interesting as it relates to the heartburn. So the third sphincter muscle that you have is at the top of the bag of the stomach. And normally this creates a tight seal so that once we've taken food into the stomach, we have a couple of things that happen. We have mechanical breaking down of food, because the stomach does this and it contracts and it mashes the food down a little bit so that it can be broken down and absorbed. And the other thing that happens is bile gets pumped into it from the gallbladder. And bile is an acid, and that chemically breaks down the food. So you've got two things happening in the stomach. And then once it's turned into this mush, it then goes through the digestive tract where all the nutrients and the water and everything else that the body needs are taken out. So when that sphincter muscle doesn't work, when you eat, or even when you haven't eaten, that bile that is normally held in the stomach whooshes up your esophagus. And now you understand why it hurts. It's just pure acid being forced up your esophagus. So it's not a nice thing at all, is it? It's quite painful. And one of the reasons that the sphincter muscles don't work so well is hormones. So in your body at the moment, you are having a cocktail of hormones that are designed to soften all the body tissues. But they're indiscriminate. They need to soften everything because your pelvis needs to open, Your uterus needs to grow. So we don't need a kind of strong, tight, rigid body in pregnancy. It needs to be quite fluid and quite soft. The other thing that needs to soften are the blood vessels, because you've now got 40% extra fluid in your body. So all the blood vessels have to enlarge as well. So there is a need for these relaxing hormones. And I think a bit of progesterone has a softening effect as well. But because it's indiscriminate, it opens all the sphincter muscles as well sometimes. So you have to be a little bit stronger with your pelvic floor. And unfortunately, there's nothing you can do to strengthen the sphincter muscle on the stomach. Because the pelvic floor sphincters are embedded within the pelvic floor, and it's a group of muscles, we can actively control and strengthen those muscles. We can improve the function of the sphincter muscles embedded in the pelvic floor. We can't do the same in the stomach, there's no muscles around it. Nothing we can do, unfortunately. But you might have noticed that since you've been pregnant, you might have, like, you know, a little bit of wee comes out when you sneeze or you cough, all these things. You know, you might start to notice you've got less control over your sphincter muscles, and that's why everything's softening, everything's loosening, and it's hormones. And then you add into that the weight of the baby sitting on a bladder. You know, so you've got a double whammy, haven't you, really? So you know, I wouldn't get too upset if you find that you've maybe weed yourself a few times. It's absolutely fine. It's very normal, and it's actually very natural, and it's very difficult to avoid. Okay, why should we exercise it? I think I've just mentioned all of that. Yeah, so strong pelvic floor will reduce the occurrence of stress incontinence. So that's the medical term for it. A little bit of wee coming out when you cough, stress incontinence, because you put a little bit of stress through the body. In addition to that, exercising your pelvic floor during pregnancy can improve the circulation to the muscles and may help them to stretch more easily over your baby's head during birth. So if you have a look at that diagram, you've got your muscles here, these kind of like, you know, knitted in, embedded muscles. And you can see the three openings. So you've got the one at the front, which is right at the top of the diagram, which is the ureterogenital opening, or the urethra, which is coming from your bladder. And then you've got the vaginal one, and then you've got the anal canal. They're all quite close to each other. But when you see the picture for the vagina, that is going to open to take up pretty much the whole of that space within the pelvic cavity. So has that made your eyes water a little bit? So if we exercise all these muscles regularly, they're going to stretch a little bit more easily. So as well as the vagina walls having to stretch, the pelvic floor muscles have to stretch as well. You know, they have to be fairly loose so that they will part and separate over the baby's head. And then, so following childbirth, because the pelvic floor muscles have stretched and separated to expand over your baby's head, this can leave them weakened and slack. But as I mentioned earlier, it is actually the weight of the uterus pressing down for 9 months that causes the most weakening of the pelvic floor muscles. So having a C-section does not necessarily mean your pelvic floor will remain strong. Well, isn't that just a pain? You know, you've got to go through the C-section, and even then, you know, it's not going to save your pelvic floor. At least it'll save your perineum. So, you know, you find the blessings where you can. Your perineum will be perfectly intact. Not to say that yours won't, but they will at least have to stretch some way. If we don't retone the muscles, they may not provide adequate support to the organs, especially after multiple births, and may lead to prolapse of the uterus, the bladder, or the bowel in later life. So it's important that you do these exercises post-birth as well. So whether you've had a C-section or not, you need to be strengthening these strengthening these muscles. So traditional pelvic floor exercises, which are known as Kegels in the US, consist of clenching and squeezing the lower part of the pelvic muscles, particularly around the bladder sphincter and the vagina. It's useful for pregnant women to become familiar with these muscles and their sensations, but more importantly, to learn to strengthen them and also relax them. Because one of the things you need to do when you're giving birth is relax the whole of your pelvic floor. And not have one that is sort of rock solid. And this is something that happens a lot. You know, I think there's one style of yoga, I think Ashtanga yoga, where they do this thing called Mula Bandha, which is basically pelvic floor lift, but they lock it on all the time. And this is what gives them the ability to do all these kind of very strong poses and sort of floating back from a handstand and things, because they've got this lift coming from the pelvic floor. But it also meant that when some of them went on to have babies, everything was so tightly locked in because they'd done all this work on their bodies. Those babies wouldn't come out. In addition to the traditional exercises, the tautness of the pelvic floor hammock can be maintained through modified yoga practices which incorporate a tuck and tilt action in the pelvis. So asana postures such as cat pose and squatting pose with an exaggerated tucking action should be incorporated into any pelvic floor routine. So we'll have a look at a few of these exercises during our practice today. Has anybody got any questions so far? It's a bit sort of like rabbit in the headlights, isn't it? Oh, you didn't even think about your pelvic floor, did you? But it's quite useful to know this, because you can kind of start the practice of getting them toned. Okay, so can you just take the legs out in front of you and then just give a little roll in and out. So roll in, and try and roll from the top of your hip, or the lower part of your hip. So rolling rather than just the feet, try and get the thighs to roll in there as well. And then maybe give it a little bit of a bounce. And then push your heels away and then push your toes away. And then same again, heels away, toes away. And just do that a few more times. And then rotate. And then go back. And then just coming back into a comfortable seated position. So if you're more than 34 weeks pregnant, you might find it more comfortable now to actually bring the soles of your feet together into butterfly pose, or maybe even opening them into a wider diamond position, so finding the comfortable position for you. And then just coming into stillness from your position. So you can sit back up against the wall if you find that comfortable. One of the things we want to do when we're sitting is to get the pelvis to slightly rotate forwards. So anytime we tuck our tailbone under and hold it in that position, we contract the front of the body. It means there's no space for our baby, no space for us, and also no space to breathe. So you need to be able, if you can, to rotate your pelvis forwards over the top of your pelvis. And actually this tucking and tilting movement is part of the pelvic floor regime. So what I want to do first of all is just get you to do this tucking and tilting. So just tuck under, but then go the other way. So you're moving your weight back into tailbone, and then shift your weight into your pubic bone so your tailbone lifts off the ground. And just do that a few times. So this tucking and tilting action is one of the moves that we can do to strengthen our pelvic floor muscles, and also to give them a bit of a stretch. So just do that a couple more times. And then come back into stillness. And then what I'd like you to do is to just move your weight very subtly from side to side, from one sitting bone to the other. So take the weight into one sitting bone, take the weight into the other sitting bone. And then as you do that, notice the space between the two sitting bones. So, when we think about the space available to us in terms of birthing, we often think of it in terms of the vagina, the birth canal. We think that's the amount of space we've got. However, these are soft tissues and they will stretch. The vagina is very, very stretchy, and it will, given the right circumstances, easily stretch over a baby. The only inhibiting boundaries that we have for the space that we have for our babies is mostly this one. It's the hip to hip one. So where you can feel those two sitting bones, that's the width of your pelvis that's available to you. And then from front to back, it's tailbone to pubic bone, but we can make that bigger. We can make that space bigger. I'll do more on that next week, because it's all about delivery, but stage 2 of labour, deliveries. I know some of you are a long way off, but it's always good to know. So that's the space that you've got. So does that feel different? It's quite a big space, isn't it? Everything else will stretch, it will soften, and it will stretch over your baby. So in terms of the space that you've got to deliver your baby through, yeah, that's quite big. That's a, bigger space. Do you want to lie on your right? Is that your left side? And that's your right side. Do you want to lie on your left side?
That's where the head is, yeah.
That's your right side, though, isn't it?
Yeah. So lie on this side.
On your left side. Yeah. Just see if that makes any difference.
She's just woke up.
And then can you take your right arm up and over your head, and then just rest, sort of kind of doing this, and you just kind of like just let it rest.
That's a good stretch, actually.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So you want to make some space along the side. Yeah, so just stay there. And exhale. Okay, and then coming into just stillness. So having made that space, or been aware of that space in the base of the pelvis. And being aware of the muscles of the pelvic floor as well. So visualizing in your own body that hammock-like diaphragm. It's known as the third diaphragm in the body. And also thinking in terms of wanting to have a little bit of buoyancy in this diaphragm. So it doesn't need to be rigid and strong. It needs to be flexible and buoyant. Things that are more buoyant are inherently stronger than things that are rigid. And just become aware of your breath. Be aware of the feeling of the breath as you inhale, and the feeling of your breath as you exhale. And then we're going to introduce a very gentle ha breath. So this is one of our birthing breaths. Has a lot of kind of fiery power to it. So it's very good for invoking a sense of energy and power. So you're just going to breathe in normally. And then as you breathe out, you are going to whisper the ha sound. And then breathe in normally again. And breathe out with your ha breath. And just carry on in that same way. So breathing in through the nose Breathing out with that soft, hard breath, just feeling the slight restriction around your throat as you make that H sound, almost like a whisper as it comes out. And then keep on going with your hard breath. And we're going to integrate it with some simple pelvic floor exercises. So as you breathe in, squeezing and tightening the muscles in the base of your pelvis, and Lydia, you can do this as well in that position. And then on the out breath, then you can carry on lying down if you want. You can, if you want to look.
Oh, get this one, I can see you.
You might need to put your pillow under the bump, under your bump, where it's where you're lying on it, because that might feel a bit, or maybe even a bit higher up. See, play around and see what feels good. So on your inhalation, just lifting and squeezing the pelvic floor muscles. And on your exhalation with your hard breath, relaxing and softening the pelvic floor muscles. So I want you to feel the difference between the squeezing and the tightening, so you're creating some strength, and then feeling the softness and the release as you breathe out. So just do that a few more times. So if you're not clear on how to engage your pelvic floor muscles, they are the muscles that you would use if you needed to go to the toilet and there was no toilet. That's what we would naturally do. We would naturally tighten the pelvic floor muscles to engage the sphincter muscles. So that's one of the best ways to engage these muscles. We're just going to do it a few more times. So just inhaling, normally squeezing the pelvic floor all the way up, and then using the hard breath to release. And one more time. And then let it go. Okay, so we're going to come into an all fours position. So just easing yourself all the way around onto your hands and your knees. And then you want to find the neutral position here. So you want to have an equal amount of weight in both hands and in both legs. You want to have the spine nice and long. So if you have your hands, because this position looks like the hands are under the shoulders, can you see? But also, so does that. But in this position, my back is long. So it's got lots of space for movement. If you have your hands too close together, it's very difficult to get anything out of your back. So just ensuring that you've lengthened your back when you have your hands in their position. And then we're going to wag your tail from side to side. So you take your tailbone across to one side, and you're going to take your tailbone across to the other side. And this is helping to loosen any tightness in the pelvis, particularly around the tailbone and around the sacrum. So the tailbone, again, we'll look at this next week, but your tailbone has to defixate, which means it needs to unlock itself for the delivery of your baby. And so doing these movements with your pelvis and your tailbone can help that process. And then we're going to go all the way back onto our heels, but you'll probably need to make some space between your knees for your baby to get all the way back. So you might not know until you get there how much space you need. So you're going to carry on with that, just swaying the tailbone from side to side, and at the same time you're going to gradually make your way back onto your heels. And as you do that, you'll notice that your zigzag gets smaller and smaller because you kind of run out of space because you've got your thighs in the way. Now the next time you breathe in, can you push your shins into ground, squeeze your pelvic floor muscles and allow that to help you rise all the way up. And then we're going to do the same thing again. So you're going to sway the hips from side to side as you slowly travel all the way back onto your heels. And you can take as many breaths as you like to get all the way back. So don't feel that you have to go quickly, particularly if you're enjoying the stretch, if it's giving you a nice sensation in your hips or in your sacrum. And then when you want to rise all the way back up, use an inhale, push into your shins, engage your pelvic floor muscles. I'm just going to do that one more time. So, just easing the tailbone from side to side, making a zigzag movement until you're all the way back. And then coming all the way back up. So now bringing the knees back into a more neutral position and stretching the right leg all the way back. So this is your anti-cramp stretch. So one of the many delights of pregnancy is cramp in the middle of the night. So if you're struggling with that, then you do this before you get into bed. You lengthen actively into the calf muscle. So you keep the hips fixed, but you push the heel away so you feel the stretch in the calf muscle. And if your calf muscle is getting crampy, what you might find is it's quite an intense stretch to begin with. You might find the calf is really, really tight. And then, after a while, the calf muscle will start to loosen. So if you're doing this at home as an anti-cramp technique, then just holding this stretch until the calf muscle releases itself. And then you're going to slide the leg behind the right leg and you're going to squeeze your thighs together. And then walk your hands a little bit around towards the left. So now you've got to stretch the right side of your body. So that can be another way to get that side stretch, Lydia.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
And then walk the hands all the way back to the centre. And then come back to neutral. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of options here. So if you're fairly early on in your pregnancy and you don't have high blood pressure, but you do have low blood pressure, then downward facing dog is a good option. If you're at the end of your pregnancy and you just don't want to do anything that strenuous, come into puppy dog pose, or this variation of puppy dog pose. Okay, so either puppy dog pose or down facing dog. Now when you do your down dog, what you're going to notice is that right leg is a lot looser than the left leg because we've stretched the right one. So just choosing which of those poses you want to work with. It's quite nice to just work the heels towards the floor. Now press the hands really firmly into the ground if you're doing the full downward dog. I would say, Lucy, because you're quite tall, you've got long legs, you could probably do with taking the feet a little bit further back and then push your, yeah, that's it. Can you feel the difference?
Yeah.
You've got space now. And then when you're ready, bringing the knees all the way down to the ground. And then we're going to do the same on the other side. So now take the left leg back behind you. Push the toes into the ground. Keep the hips fixed and actively push the heel away. And then you'll have that same thing again. You'll feel that there's a little bit of tightness, possibly a lot of tightness if you're suffering with cramp at the moment. And you just hold that position until the intensity wears off. And then once the intensity has worn off, you can take that leg behind the right thigh and keep it straight, Lucy. Or you're just trying to get you're just trying to navigate a space. So keep that leg straight and then grip your thighs together. And then just take little walks with your hands over towards the right side. You might only need to do it a couple of times until you feel the length on the left side of the body. And then take a few breaths here. And then just slowly walk hands all the way back. And do the leg. And then same thing again, either downward facing dog or puppy dog pose. And now in the down dog, you might find that the legs are fairly even now. And then when you're ready, you can bring the knees all the way down. Okay, so once you get down, just come and sit back and then swing the legs all the way out. Come into a wide-legged position. Is everybody okay in the pubic bone area with this position? Yeah, everyone's all right. You might find it comfortable to place a block or a cushion underneath your sitting bones, and what you want to do is kind of wedge the sitting bones forwards. You've got that forward rotation that I was talking about earlier. So that's probably a bit, yeah, the bricks don't work, so the two, they're just too big. I mean, if you have a look at this, the one I've got wedged underneath. So the other thing you can do is actually roll up a bit of your mat. So if you came towards the front of your mat and roll the back of it up, so you basically kind of want that much rolled up, and then when you sit on it, mine's a bit more, but mine isn't giving me any, it's not giving me anything. But you've got a thicker mat, so you might find that it just gives you, and what you want to do is kind of almost fall off the edge. So you only want your sitting bones on, not your buttocks, so that you get this feeling that your pelvis is just being lightly tilted forwards. And if that doesn't work, then yeah, pillow and just wedge it underneath the sitting bone, so there's this feeling of tilting forwards. And then just lengthening the heels away. So some heartburn stretches and also lovely side stretches. So these moves, they kind of deal with a multitude of issues. Really good for heartburn, but also really good for rib pain and making space, you know, in your lower abdomen. So you can take the arms up over the head and just have a little stretch through one side and a little stretch through the other side. So we're just lengthening. So what we're doing here is actually not coming over to the side so much. If you have a look, my arm's coming down and my body's fairly upright. I'm lengthening from my fingertips into my hip and then swap sides. So fingertips to the ceiling, hip rooting. And what this is doing is lifting the rib cage away from the pelvis. And then you can start to extend that a little bit more and maybe come sideways. You can drop the elbow onto the thigh, and as you breathe out, come over. And as you breathe in, come up, change the sides, and as you breathe out, come over. So with side bends, what we're looking for is to actually create length in the waist. So you want to keep the hip rooted and lengthen the rib cage up and away from the pelvis. So this is a nice stretch for rib pain, nice for the shoulders, helps with the breathing as well. So if you're struggling with your breath, lengthening through the side ribs can be quite useful. And then come up to the centre. So then we can make that even bigger. So with heartburn, what we want to do, bearing in mind what I said earlier about the sphincters, what we want to do with heartburn is actually lengthen the esophagus and make some space between the stomach, the sphincter and the esophagus. So we do that by taking the arms up over the head and holding the elbows. Now keep pushing the heels away so you feel rooted in the lower part of the body, and where you've got hold of your elbows, lift them. And just feel that sense of space and elevation through the upper body. And then we're going to come over to the sides. So we're going to breathe in, lengthen and lift the elbows. And then on the out breath, just come over to one side, doesn't matter which side. And as you breathe in, you come back to the centre. And as you breathe out, other side. And then the next time, you come up to the centre. You can just release. A little bit more hip work. So what you can do here is place the soles of your feet on the floor, lean back into your hands, and then just drop the knees over. And what you're looking for particularly is the internally rotating knee to get a really nice stretch in the hip with this one. And then come to the other side, and again aiming to get the knee down. So the other knee may go down as well, but we're looking at this one, the internal rotation. And just do that a few times, so take the knees over. The wider the legs are, the easier this is actually. So don't feel that you have to bring the legs really close together. A couple more times. Just noticing how the hips feel. So again, the hips can get very stiff during pregnancy. I spend a lot of time undoing tight hips in these classes. So if your hips are feeling a little bit niggly, then just mention that. Okay. And then coming back to the centre, and then coming back onto your hands and your knees. And we're going to do the pelvic tuck here. So we did a little bit of this in the all fours position, sorry, when we were sitting, but it's a lot more effective in this position. So this is very different to cat pose. So any of you that have done yoga before and in my classes as well. So cat pose is where you arch the back, lengthen the back, arch the back, lengthen the back. We're not going to do that. So the body stays fairly still. We're only going to move the pelvis, and it's going to be tuck and tilt. So it looks like this. Tuck the tailbone under, squeeze the pelvic floor, and you're moving your tailbone towards your navel, and then tilt it the other way. So now you're sticking the sitting bones up to the ceiling. And then tucking, so tailbone towards the navel, tilting, sitting bones up towards the ceiling. And just do that a few more times. So this tucking and tilting is really effective in strengthening the pelvic floor muscles. So what you're doing here is you are alternately stretching and lengthening them, and then compressing and contracting them and gathering them all together. So when you do the tilt, when you're lifting the tailbone up to the ceiling, you might feel this bit of a stretch in the perineum because you're lengthening the muscles and pulling the muscle fibres of the pelvic floor further apart. And then when you tuck and you take your tailbone towards your navel, the muscles are gathering together and they're strengthening. And this is what you want with a fully functioning muscle. You want it to be able to do both of these things. The muscle fibres need to lengthen and contract, because otherwise you end up with hypertonic muscle, which is too stiff and too rigid, or you end up with a weak muscle because it's too lengthened. So these moves address all of those problems. Okay, so from here we're going to transition up to standing. So one nice way to do that is to tuck your toes under, walk your hands back to your knees, and then lift the knees off the ground. And then just drop your heels to the floor and just dangle a little bit over the legs. And again, you might want to take the legs wider to make room for your baby. And then just let go of your head, let go of your shoulders. Now again, for low blood pressure, this is a really nice one, so you might want to spend some time here. Otherwise, if your blood pressure is high, you probably think you've come to the end of your time here now, so slowly come up. Now again, if you've got low blood pressure, when you come up, it's important to come up really slowly. So bend the knees. You might even want to put your hands on your thighs and just make this slow journey upwards. And come all the way up. All right? No dizziness? A little bit. Okay, so we'll have a look at some squatting. So squatting, again, it's good for creating strength in the muscles, but it's also really good practice for the pelvic floor. The squatting is slightly different to how you work in the gym, because in the gym they're just working on the thighs. And you tend to do this in the gym squats, don't you? Come forwards, body comes forwards, and you come up. When you're working with the pelvic floor, you want it to be more tuck and tilt. And if you see, my pelvis isn't really doing that. I'm just hinging. What you want to do is this, and then go so pelvic floor back, and then tuck under. Pelvic floor back, and tuck under. So it's a different thing. So you're not leaning forwards with this one. You can take the arms out, bend the knees, and then tilt the tailbone backwards to come into your squat, and then tuck the tailbone under to come up. So you're kind of curling up. So tilt the tailbone backwards to come into your squat, and then tuck it under, almost like you're scooping to rise up. Okay, can you all feel the difference? Tilting, and then tucking and scooping. So a couple more times. And then coming up, so you might want to give the legs a little bit of a shake. So another practice we can do, this is more getting into the glutes, and it's quite a funny little practice. I'm doing some glute squeezes, and it's quite interesting to see if we have got control over our glutes or not. So you can bring your hands onto your hips if you like, and then what you're going to do is squeeze your right buttock and then let it go. Squeeze your left buttock and let it go. And squeeze both buttocks and let them go. So this also has an effect on the muscles in the pelvic girdle. Okay, so you're just going to keep doing that. So you're going to do right squeeze and relax, left squeeze and relax, both, and then relax. You all okay with that, or is it just not, is there no connection from brain to buttock? And that does happen sometimes. You know, if we've never grown a neural pathway from our brain to our buttock, if we've never said, okay, buttock, squeeze, we haven't grown the neurological pathway. And what is interesting about that is that your baby, when your baby is here, will have to do that for every single thing they do. So when babies are born, they have no neurological pathways. They come out, they can't lift their head up, they can open their eyes, and that's about it, and suck, and then reflexes rather than neurological pathways. One of the things that's nice to look at with a baby is to watch all these neurological pathways grow. So watch how when they learn to hold their head up. It's not just about muscle strength, it's about sending the neuron, that message from the brain to the head to go hold it up. Because muscles need the nervous system to tell them what to do. So they don't work on their own. Every time you move a muscle, it's because your brain sends a message through the nervous system, all these neurons jumping, these electrical signals to go, move your thumbs, move your fingers, squeeze your butt. And you'll see your baby learning all these things, and they like look at their hands and go, ooh, and they find their feet and they suck their toes. And all these, and actually the feet are the last one, to the last bit. So when your baby finds their feet, you know that they've grown all their neurological pathways, because they go down and out. So they, from the brain, so you can imagine that brain here, brain stem, all the neurological pathways grow this way, they grow down, they grow outwards as well. So their arms and hands, digestive organs, and then the last thing is the feet. So it's a fascinating thing to watch, just watching your baby grow their neurological pathway. So you can also grow a neurological pathway into your buttocks and into your pelvic floor as well. So just a few more times. So squeezing, squeezing, both. Right, left, both. Right, left, both. Right, left, both. Okay, so we've got a funny walk. That is another way of working through this pelvic floor exercise. So it used to be called the camel. I think it's because of the belly makes a sort of a hump, but the lady who taught this is the lady who I did my pregnancy teaching training with. She's now called it a peacock for some reason. I don't know why she changed it from camel to a peacock, but you can make your own mind up. So we're going to start with a simplified version, and then we're going to see if we can walk it around the room, because it's actually not that easy. So you can bring your hands onto your hips, and we're going to scoop. So you're going to stick the tailbone out, a little bit like we were doing the squatting, and then we're going to scoop all the way up to straighten the legs. So it's kind of less squat and more of a scoop. So tailbone goes all the way back, and then you're going to scoop with your pubic bone all the way up. And just do that a few times, and I'm hoping that during that scoop you can feel something happening in your pelvic floor muscles. Okay, all got that? Scooping going nicely. So now you're going to try and walk with that scoop. And this is where the brain goes, what? So it kind of looks a bit like this. And the key thing is taking little steps. So the knee comes up, and then when you go to take the tailbone back again, the foot comes down. You can see it's only moved a little bit. And then you scoop and you lift. And as you go back down, the foot comes down. So there's a kind of uplift in the knee while you're scooping. And then the inclination is to go, ah, and do a really big step. Then you've got nothing to scoop with. So you actually have to take little tiny steps. And this is the bulk of the movement coming from the knee. Give it a go. Chicken. Oh yeah, there you go, chicken. You're right actually. Okay, so start with the scoop, and that's the main thing. So you're still scooping, but you're just lifting the legs up. And just remembering that you're taking a tiny, actually dinosaur, even more than chickens and dinosaurs, they're quite sort of linked, aren't they? So don't forget to keep the scoop. Nice, Dolly, yeah, got a good scoop there. You've got to have a scoop. And then you can scoop your way back to your mat. I can just smell, does it just smell paint? Oh
no,
is it
diesel? Like,
oh, it's you!
Oh, it's like fast on the leg, and then it's just like squirting all over. It's like, oh,
it's funny when you smelt it. It must have been when you started scooping. You've unleashed the diesel.
Yeah.
While you're scooping. Okay, so another thing we can do with our pelvic floor is to come into a warrior one position. So we're going to start with our feet hip width apart. And then you're going to imagine your feet are on train tracks. And you're going to take the right leg back. Now come onto the ball of your foot and send the hips to the front, and then bend the left knee so it sits comfortably over the ankle. You don't want that knee to go further forwards, and then drop the back heel to the floor. So what you want is to have a long enough stride so that knee is protected. And then we're going to take the arms up over the head. And you're going to keep rooting down through the feet. Now when you press your feet into the ground, really push them into the earth, and you'll feel there's a little lift in the pelvic floor, and that comes just from pushing your feet into the earth. Now, as you push into the earth with your feet, lengthen the right arm up as we did earlier. Push the feet into the ground and lengthen the left arm up. So you've got that little side bend, but we're pushing into the ground as well with our feet, and that's the important thing. So we're rooting, grounding with our feet, and we're reaching up through the hands. We've got a nice stretch through the upper body, but that foot press is causing us to contract our pelvic floor muscles. And then release. Straighten the front leg, interlace the fingers. Now again, with low blood pressure, this is quite a nice one. It's a bit of extra blood and oxygen to the head. I'll show you first. Just going to pull the hips back. You can soften the front knee if your hamstrings are tight. And you're going to take the arms up over the head. Now, if you've got high blood pressure, you're going to leave your hands on the lower back instead. And you're going to come over on an out breath. And then on an in breath, bend the front knee a little bit more, push the foot into the ground, pull back through the arms and rise up. And then straighten the leg. Breathe out, draw the hips back, fold forwards and raise the arms. And then bend the front knee, push into the ground and rise all the way up. And just do that one more time. Draw the hips back to breathe out, take the arms over the head. And then gently rise all the way up. And then from there, we're going to just swivel the feet into a wide position. Yeah, you can swivel around this way. And then you're going to fold forwards. Again, any head down positions can be quite nice for low blood pressure. So you've got a couple of options. You can just bring the fingertips onto the ground. You can bring the palms onto the floor. So wherever you can comfortably get to. If you can't bring the hands all the way down to the floor, rest them on a block so that you can give a little bit of height. And then we're just going to do some sitting bone lifts. So fix your attention onto your sitting bones, those places that we felt into when we were sitting. And then just gently lift the right sitting bone and let it go. Gently lift the left sitting bone and let it go. So it's a very subtle move, just lifting the sitting bone, letting it go. Lifting the sitting bone and letting it go. And then same again. The sitting bone lifts and releases. And then bend the knees, bring the heels in and the toes out. So you're going to swivel and then bring your hands slowly up onto your thighs so you're into a squatting position. And then press the feet down into the ground. So again, when you push the feet into the floor in your squatting position, notice how that kind of, it almost travels up the legs and pulls up on your pelvic floor. So push the feet into the ground. Feel the pelvic floor, and then just relax the effort. Notice how the pelvic floor relaxes. Push the feet into the ground, and then relax. One more time. And then slowly come up. Bring your toes in and your heels in, until you come all the way back. And then come back to the front of your mat. And then you're going to do the same thing, so feet are hip distance apart. Keep them hip width apart as you slide the left leg back this time. Come onto the ball of the left foot, bend the right knee, and make sure you can't take it any further forwards, and then bring the left heel to the floor. And then push down into the ground as you take your arms all the way up overhead. Now, as you push the feet into the ground, lengthen one arm up, and then you can soften a little bit. Push the feet into the ground again as you lengthen through the other side. So remember, this lengthening comes from lifting the ribcage up and away from the pelvis. And at the same time, you're pushing the feet into the ground. So you can feel that pelvic floor movement, strengthening. And one more time. And then straighten the leg, reaching the arms all the way back, interlacing the fingers, squeeze the shoulder blades together. Breathe in. And as you breathe out, draw the sitting bones backwards. And soften the front knee if you need to. So if the hamstrings are a little bit tight, then soften the front knee. And then to come up slightly, bend the front knee, push the feet into the ground, rise all the way up. Now try that with the ha breath. It'll give you a little bit more time. Push the foot into the ground and lift. the arms to come up. So just about 2 more times. So on the exhale, hard breath, draw the heels, so draw the hips all the way back. Just folding forwards, take the arms over the head, unless you've got high blood pressure. And then to come up, soften the knee. And one more time. And then from here, just going to step the feet forwards. And then have a little bit of a bounce. So jiggle the feet, the legs, give them a little bit of a wobble. And then just curling down towards the floor. So take your time, come down, bring the hands to the floor, and then you can just step one knee back and then the other so that you're all the way down. And then taking the legs all the way out. And coming back into your comfortable seated position, so whatever that is, whether it's sitting butterfly or kneeling. So what I used to teach when I had a big bag of blocks was to kind of stack 3 blocks up together, which meant that when you were sort of in the last 3 or 4 weeks of your pregnancy, you could come into a kneeling position, which is so much more comfortable. So you'd basically be like this, because the blocks were supporting you, but I had to get rid of them all for COVID. So you can't really do that anymore. It doesn't really work with a cushion. So yeah, I might go and buy more blocks because they're quite useful. Okay, so come back into a comfortable seated position. I'm going to work through a different pelvic floor technique. So we're going to squeeze the pelvic floor muscles as we were doing before. Are you all okay with that? You all kind of access your pelvic floor muscles. Okay. So just become aware of your breath and just cultivate a nice, steady, regular breathing rhythm. Now the next time you breathe in, you're going to lift and squeeze your pelvic floor muscles. And then as you breathe out, you're going to relax them and let them go. Now the next time you breathe in, you're going to lift and squeeze your pelvic floor muscles, but this time you're going to hold them in place while you breathe out. And that creates a little bit more of difficulty. Then you're going to breathe in, maybe get a little bit more lift and squeeze out of your pelvic floor. And then on the second exhalation, you can relax and let them go. So what we're doing is we're adding 1 more breath every time. So breathing in, lifting and squeezing the pelvic floor muscles. And you're going to hold it there for 2 breaths now. So you're going to breathe out. See if you can maintain the strength in your pelvic floor while you breathe out. And then breathing in, lifting and squeezing a little bit more. Breathing out again, still holding the pelvic floor. So now into your 3rd breath, lifting and squeezing. And this time on the out breath, releasing. So you're building up 1 breath every time. Now, if you can't hold the pelvic floor, if there's nothing left at the end of 3 breaths, then just go to the place where you can. So if you can only hold it for 2 breaths, stay there, develop the strength there until you can move on to 3 breaths and then 4 breaths. If you were okay at 3 breaths, try 4 breaths. So each doing your own practice. Alright, got niggles.
Yeah.
Do you want to go back on your side? Because you can do these exercises on your side.
Yeah.
So this is exercising the slow twitch muscles. So when we have muscles, we can exercise them in the fast twitch muscle function or the slow twitch muscle function. And when we squeeze, release rapidly, that is obviously the fast twitch. This is the slow twitch muscle because we are having to hold the pelvic floor for 3 breaths, 4 breaths, and we're going to get up to 5 breaths for those of you that can get all the way up to 5. But you don't have to do it today, you can just build it up. So if you want to stay at 3, that's fine. But I would recommend doing these practices regularly, so a couple of times a day. And then the next time you breathe out, you can just let that go. Notice how the pelvic floor feels. So for some of us, it may just be a case of kind of waking them up and waking up our connection and our relationship to the pelvic floor muscles today. But doing the exercises regularly will enhance this connection, this relationship, and also give you more possibility to actually strengthen them. But it is something, unfortunately I have to say, when you're a mum, pre-mum and post-mum and then menopause, when you're a woman, pelvic floor exercises just really need to become part of your life, unfortunately. So you might as well get into a habit, and there's lots of different ways of doing them. One of the key things is remembering, isn't it? So a lot of women say when you clean your teeth, do them, because you do that twice a day for like 3 or 4 minutes. So do your pelvic floors when you clean your teeth. If you drive a lot, every time you come to a red light, you can do your pelvic floor exercises. It's just having something. We've got Fitbit watches and things now. You can set them. So every time your Fitbit says move, do some pelvic floor exercises as well. Okay, so I can see lots of you are yawning, so I think it's time to lie down. Oh, you weren't the only one, Laura. Neither were you first. So yeah, if you want to come and lie down, so if you're less than 20 weeks of pregnancy, this is going to get to do something. Yes. If you're less than 20 weeks and it's comfortable, you can still lie on your back. Post 20 weeks, that pressure on the vena cava gets quite bad, or it starts to progressively get bad. So that's when you need to lie on your side. You can lie on your left side or your right. There isn't really a lot of difference actually. I know they say that don't lie on your right side, but the positioning of the vena cava is minimally to the right. So it doesn't really matter actually. If you look at it from a geographical perspective. So coming onto your side, and then you might also want to kind of prop yourself up wherever you feel you need it. So when you lie on your side, this is what we were talking about earlier, all these pillows you can get. So just finding what works. You might need a pillow under your head, you might need one under your bump. If you've got round ligament pains in the ligaments supporting your uterus, then you might need to put something underneath your belly. If you've got any hip pain, particularly in the sacroiliac area, you might feel more comfortable placing a block between your thighs. So it's finding where do you need the support and what feels good. Okay, and then you're just going to rest completely into this position. And just allow yourself to soften. So become aware of the parts of your body that touch the ground at the moment. And see if you can release those parts a little bit more into the ground. Can you soften your body a little bit more so that there's a sense of heaviness? But this is the heaviness that comes from relaxation. So again, there's something inherently heavy about relaxed muscles, and again, if you haven't had a baby yet, it's your first baby, then this won't be noticeable to you, but it will when it happens. So when you have a toddler and they fall asleep, they are incredibly heavy because all their muscles are relaxed. And as a mother, as a parent, you spend a lot of time moving comatose children from one place to the other. And you'll recognise once you do that just how heavy they are, because they've relaxed everything. And so this is what I'm suggesting now, that you get into this place of softness and relaxation that creates this feeling of heaviness. And then just allow your breathing to find its own gentle rhythm. Just watch the coming and going of your breath. And then what I'd like you to do every time you breathe out is breathe out very gently through the lips, almost as if you were blowing tiny wisps of smoke out between the lips. So very soft and very gentle. So just breathing in naturally through the nose, and as you breathe out, just making this very soft wisping of the breath out through the lips. And as you continue to breathe out, imagine that the breath that you are gently wisping away from the body is coming out as a golden stream of light. And just notice how that golden stream of light looks. So you might imagine or visualize that it comes out almost like a laser beam, strong, straight line, very powerful, very strong. Or you might visualize and sense that this golden light is coming out like a ribbon blowing in the breeze. Or maybe even more ethereal, like smoke gently rising from a fire, so moving in all directions and then gently dissipating. So just noticing how your golden light manifests for you. And as you continue to work with this golden light, wisping out with every exhalation, just imagine that this golden light is building up around the whole of your body. So every time you breathe out this golden light in whichever pattern or direction or movement, imagine that it's starting to build up a golden light egg around your body until eventually you feel your whole body to be completely cocooned inside this sphere or oval of golden light. This golden light, like an egg or a golden aura surrounding the whole of your body, creating a sense of safeness awareness of your own personal space. Next time you breathe out, you can let go of your golden thread breath and just let your breathing settle back into normal. And if you like, you can maintain this golden egg of protection around your body and take it with you. Bring your awareness back into the sensations in your physical body. So just noticing how your body feels. Be aware of your toes and your fingers and maybe give them a little bit of movement. Be aware of your baby and notice what sensations you're getting from your baby at the moment. So you might have some big movements, little movements, or no movements at all. Particularly if you're in the earlier stages of your pregnancy. Take a long, slow breath in and just sigh the breath out, just letting rid of any final stresses or worries. And then from here, as we move towards the end of our practice this evening, just making a little bit of movement, fingers and toes, maybe stretching your body if you need to. In your own time, when you feel ready, just gradually make your way up into a seated position. And then once you're there, you can take the arms all the way up over the head. Maybe have a last minute little stretch. So at the end of most yoga classes, we always chant the mantra Om. And I'm going to start doing this in the class because it's very similar to the bee breath in the sense that it gives you this wonderful vibratory effect for your baby. And it has three sounds to it. When we chant this on its own, it has three sounds that blend into one, and that is the R, U, So we chant all three of those sounds in one out breath, about a third of your breath for each one. The R resonates in the belly, the U resonates in your heart, and the resonates in the head. And babies love a little bit of internal sound massages, just as they do when we do the bee breath. So we're going to take the arms up over the head on the inhalation and then bring the hands down as we chant. And just notice how you feel and how your baby feels. Thank you very much, Yogini Mamas. Namaste.